like 8 or 8:15, so we have a few minutes. And with that, Caleb.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Yep.
So, thanks everyone for coming down, the regulars that are usually here every month, and folks who are coming down this evening to join us for a presentation from David Blittersdorf to talk about Vermont's renewable energy future, particularly how that future is rolling out in Addison County. David brings a lot of experience, maybe as much experience as anyone in the state of Vermont in the world of renewable energy development, and having been involved in the industry at the national scale, with founding NRG Systems in 1981, to continuing with really the largest renewable energy manufacturer around with all earth renewables and Williston manufacturing a solar tracker that's being deployed on the residential scale projects up to the largest solar project in Vermont, which is 2.2 megawatts. And indeed, the tracker projects are the most productive of those large projects. David's also developed a smallish but medium-scale 10-megawatt wind turbine farm in Georgia, the Georgia Mountain Community Wind Farm, and that's been very successful as well. So excited to hear what he's got to tell us, and with that, bring David on.
Well, thank you, Caleb. It's really nice having a former employee introduce me. And he didn't even say bad things, so that's great. Caleb's out there actually selling our stuff these days. But what I'm here today to talk about is I'm going to give you sort of a big picture of where we are in energy. Because you're in Addison County, there's this uproar over aesthetics on solar. I've been through this being in the wind business for 30 years. The aesthetics of wind turbines were the first big thing. We don't want to look at them. But there's one fundamental reason we have to look at solar and we have to look at wind. They're both energy collection devices, solar cells or wind turbine. And when you have the air blowing over hills or in the valley, you have to have large collection devices. That's why wind turbines are so big. That's why solar has to be big, because we have diffuse energy from the sun and the wind. You have to collect it. But we've gotten very used to things called fossil fuels. Fossil fuels were they're made from millions of years of solar energy. But it got concentrated in the coal, oil, gas, even uranium. So we got all this stuff packed into a lump of coal. But it's basically millions of years of solar energy. And I'm going to show you what we've done in this modern world. And what we did is we won the energy lottery. In other words, we won the prize. It's called fossil fuels. So between 1900 and the year 2100, we're going to spend every bit of those lottery winnings called fossil fuels. If we do, we'll probably destroy our climate with the CO2 emissions. So we can't use it all. We can't use all the coal that's there, probably. We'll probably use all the oil, and we'll use most of the natural gas. But we're going to heat our environment, and we're going to do this. But there's another way. But the other way requires a major change in our thinking. And like every lottery winner, you know the story. Every lottery winner ends up bankrupt. And we're going to do the same thing. If we don't change to the weekly paycheck called renewable energy. So, let me just start with a number of bullet points here. Roadblocks to what I consider a secure future. The very first one is this word, denial. We're in utter denial we have a problem. You hear it nationally. Oh, and we haven't put a cost on carbon, because that's the thing that's driving everything. If we don't put a cost on carbon with a carbon tax or something, we will never solve this problem. And energy is a problem, but it's more of a dilemma. A problem you can solve. A dilemma will always be there. We will make big inroads of correcting our energy use and where we get energy, but we will never totally solve it because we need energy all the time, and it's going to be difficult. So we have this problem: lack of urgency, supply depletion. I'll show you what's happening with oil. We have this NIMBY, that's right here in Vermont. So, not in my backyard, but I want to get my SUV, I want electricity showing up at my house every day, I want the oil truck to deliver me my heating oil. So I say things like, well, if you don't want to be part of producing your energy locally, what gives you the right to take it from other places and take it from other people? Because someone has an impact. And whether it's the mountaintops that are blown off in Appalachia, the 100+ mountains that aren't there anymore, it's totally gone. And then all we ask is that you have to look at a solar panel or a wind turbine once in a while. So it's a dilemma. We have some other things. We don't have an energy policy in the United States. We don't have an energy plan. When Obama says all the above, that's not a plan. That's just what we've always been doing. It doesn't work. Turns out the United States as a country is the most regulated place in the world. Even Europe has less regulation than we do. We think we're an independent, free place, but between zoning regs, code officials, all the stuff you go through that actually permit anything, we're the most regulated in the world. So we have to work on this because it's too complex, too time consuming, and it takes a lot of energy. Every bureaucrat that is slowing you down on permitting is a 20-ton carbon unit. Every American is equivalent of 20 tons of carbon emitted, 20 tons of carbon emitted for every American. So, if you take out 1 million bureaucrats, you save a lot of carbon. And the last thing, I won't get into it much, but understanding energy returned on energy invested. In other words, anytime you try to create more energy, you have to spend energy to make that energy source usable. In the old days when Beverly Hillbillies, Jed Clampett shoots his gun in the ground and oil squirts all over the place, that was very little amount of energy to get a lot of energy out of the ground. That doesn't happen anymore. And that would have an energy returned on energy invested of maybe thousands to one. And one bullet in the ground and oh, I got tons and tons of energy. But we have things going on today like ethanol that goes in your gasoline. It has an energy returned on energy invested of 1. So that means we put as much energy in oil and other things to get 1 unit of energy out. That is not something we should be doing. It doesn't work. So it's not producing anything, it's just exchanging oil to ethanol. And at the same time destroying topsoil.
Not to mention the fact that it's burning a lot of older engines.
Yeah. Yep. So the first thing I want to talk about is, I talk about oil. This is a Hubbard peak. This is all the oil that's been extracted out of the ground over the years. So here we are around 2015. This was done many years ago, but it's a projection of peaking of world oil supply. This is actually happening. But what you hear on TV, and you see the ads, oh, the United States is going to be the new Saudi Arabia oil. We got so much oil and gas that just keep driving, do all this, don't worry. But it's a myth and a fraud. It's not real. The reason this looks like a bell curve, because all finite resources that we have on Earth are produced in a bell curve fashion. So when we hit the peak of the bell curve, the area under this curve is all the oil we'll ever have. So we're halfway depleted on all the oil that we will ever use. But the peak production always happens around the halfway point. So you don't produce oil and then one day you have zero. You start declining. Here's 2050. 2100, it goes down to basically zero if we keep extracting the way we're extracting oil. Every technology possible. Natural gas liquids, polar, which is Arctic, deep water, fracking, will be in there. But this is real life. This is what the geologists say, not the PR folks that put the ads on for the American oil and natural gas law. So what you see on TV is wrong. This is real life that's coming. We're bouncing around at the plateau right now. That's why oil prices are volatile. First we have oversupply, undersupply. Things are bouncing around. And it'll be this way for a little while until we start going down, which is only a few years away. This is worldwide. One other thing, this is the United States, this green. And if you study what happened in World War II is down in here. The United States produced 2/3 of the world's oil back during World War II. We won the war based on resources. We had the iron ore, we had the copper, we had the oil. Germany had no oil at the end of the war. Japan had no access to oil. So it was a resource war, and we won. Look where we are today. We're importing. And this is all we produce compared to all this other stuff in the world oil situation.
Does that include natural gas?
No, this is just oil.
I appreciate all your arguments, but you should definitely update this with new EIA data, because obviously today's projections show U.S. shale oil skyrocketing to the point that we're going to be increasing production for at
All
least
that does is
20,
flip
30
this
years.
up. We still import
But our share
almost
of the global is
50%.
absolutely increasing and will be for a while.
Fracked oil, fracked gas is a short-term phenomenon. And the reason is you must frack again and drill new wells. Now, I'm not going to get in an argument with you right now. Let me finish and we'll talk afterwards. But
Not that that's a good thing anyway. I mean, more oil is not good. It's bad.
no, oil
This
is
is
not
really
good.
outdated
It is a
figure.
short-term issue. And by figuring out fracking, you're just releasing stuff that's been locked in shale. But it's very energy intensive, and it's like tar sands. It doesn't really work on the energy returns long term. So this is just a nice graphic of this oil thing, and this is what's going to happen. You had oil, which is 40% of the world's energy. You add another 20-some%, which is coal, another 20-some%, which is natural gas. So you take all the fossils, and you have this nice big hump here, and we're living right in the sweet spot. All these things are going to deplete. This is the past. We used to live on solar, wind, hydro, wood. We're going to have to live on solar, wind, all these things again. But you'll notice something. This is just oil. If you go and draw another peak up to here, these renewables can never do what the million years of fossil fuels have done for us. So there's the lottery analogy. We can probably do on the order of 20 to 30% of what we're used to living on for energy. So, what's that mean? Conservation, efficiency, all these other things have to be in play. Otherwise, none of this works. Renewables and reducing energy use is critical. So all this stuff has to happen. I'm just going to quickly go through some wind stuff because we here in Vermont were the host of the first large wind turbine on Grandpa's Knob down near Castleton to put electric power into the electric grid in the 1940s. A great experiment, proved that wind worked. It lost a blade in 1945. It was shut down, torn down. You can still go up there and see the foundations. There's 4 foundations. It's kind of cool. But I grew up in Pittsburgh, so I overlooked Grandpa's Knob. That's how I got involved in wind since I was 12 years old. So I got the bug. I knew something was better than nuclear power and oil back in 1969. I didn't know I'd be in the wind and solar business now, but this was very important. And it really started the whole wind industry in the world in the 1980s when wind power came back. And at the time, the blade flew off, and Palmer Putnam, who was the chief engineer, wrote a book about the whole experiment. At the time, coal was promised to be 20% cheaper than wind, and the promise of nuclear power was right around the corner. So nobody did anything in wind for decades and decades and decades. So that was critical, and it's right here in Vermont that we did this stuff. So I'm going to just quickly go through first wind farm in Vermont, small one in Searsburg down south. Sheffield was built a couple of years ago up in the Northeast Kingdom. Lowell, which is GMP's project, 21 turbines. It's the largest wind farm in Vermont. And Georgia Mountain, the one I built in Milton, in Georgia, just 4 turbines. These 4 turbines supply almost 10% of Burlington's electricity. Just 4 turbines. Now they're big. These are almost 270 feet tall to the center, and the rotors are 330 feet in diameter. And some people have said, well, I really like local wind turbines. I want everybody to have them at their houses. I don't want to look them on the mountain. Well, these 4 turbines are equivalent to 14,000 home wind turbines, just like the one at the schools around here. 14,000 these replace that. And these are 5 times more cost effective. So if you want to pay 50 cents a kilowatt hour for your electricity, go with the home turbines. It's not going to work. These are much more efficient, much more productive, and scale is important. It's that big rotor that captures all that wind instead of all those little ones down low where there's not much wind. So let's talk about solar. Since 2009, I've been installing solar trackers in Vermont. We have almost 2,500 of these in Vermont right now. And we were the largest installer of solar for a large number of years, except that everybody's catching on these days and it's growing rapidly, which we wanted. We wanted to get a lot more people involved, a lot more people working in solar, and it's working. Vermont has some of the best laws in the United States. We have a registration for home solar. It's not a permit, preempts local zoning. You can do it in 10 days. No one else in the United States does this. Now Germany does it. You can actually do it in 1 minute in Germany, putting solar on your house, because you register it online. We still have paper. We still takes 10 days to do this. But we're doing good stuff. I'm just going to run through a bunch of pictures. This is at BYCC along 89. There's 42 kilowatts there. I think there's 10 trackers. And there was supposed to be a bunch more in a field and back, but we got into a fight with the conservation people. This was the only strip of land that wasn't conserved around there. The back acreage was conserved. And we wanted to do a trade where we would put 150 kilowatts, which was 30 trackers, but we needed to change the conservation easement and trade 50 acres for the roughly 3 acres. They refused to do it, so we just put them where we could. And the whole problem they had was visibility. But if you ever drive 89 through Richmond, you see these. And they have to be seen to collect the sun. Caleb might have even done this one. Champlain Orchards, was that one of yours?
Yeah, the last one too.
Was it BYCC?
Yeah.
No? So Champlain Orchards has 2 different solar orchards, I call them. So they have apple orchards and they have solar orchards. It takes care of all their electricity for their whole operation. Middlebury College, 2012, we put in 150 kilowatts. Danforth Pewter and Gardner Supply in Addison, there's a 150 kilowatt Solar Orchard, and they get their electricity from there. And it's all under a program that is one of the best group net metering programs in the United States. It's a virtual system. So even though this is not next to their building, they get the electricity from it on a bill. It's just a billing thing. The very first solar, 150 kilowatts, I did in Heinsberg, next to the NRG buildings, 2009. And there's some tractors in the back of the farmer hang. It's on the edge of the field. So it works combined with your farming operations. And this is an aerial shot of right after we finished construction of South Burlington. There's 382 tractors. So it's not a little tractor, but there's a field full of them. That field, somebody says, well, shouldn't you be growing corn or something in it? Well, it's supposed to be 100 houses. What's better? I think tractors, solar is better than building houses. What must be done? And this is from a bigger perspective, national or worldwide. But we have this carbon problem. We have to reduce carbon probably by 80%. And we're all used to compounding of interest when we put it in savings and investments. So, you're seeing your 5% every year growing and multiplying. The problem with carbon reduction is you have to go the other way. A 5% reduction every year for the next 40 years gets you to the 80% cut. Because it's over and over, 5% every year of what that year is. We're still growing carbon in the world. We haven't even leveled off. So we have a lot to do to start reducing carbon. Carbon tax, we got to do a carbon tax. British Columbia's done a carbon tax. Sweden has a carbon tax. It works. It helps our economy. British Columbia, as a province, is the best performing province in Canada. And they have a carbon tax. And everybody said, oh, they're all going to go out of business. It doesn't work that way. It actually helps the economy and how they designed it. We're trying to do that in Vermont. So here's some other things. Electricity is going to become our #1 energy carrier. And renewables are electric technologies. Wind, solar, hydro. So we're going to change from about 25% of our energy coming from electricity. We're going to end up at 60 to 90%. Eventually, it will be mostly electric. And because we're going to get off of liquid fuels and hard fuels, coal, we must move to electrified mass transit. And I put this in here, but a lot of people don't want to face the fact that we're probably going to have to abandon the car. The car has been our #1 reason we consume so much energy. Suburbia is built around the car. Our highway system is heavily subsidized around the car. It takes a lot of energy to run a car-centric system. The sad thing is China is adapting the car. And they sold more cars last year in China than were sold in the United States. Something like 18 or 19 million cars. And they think within 10 years they're going to be selling 40 or 50 million cars. And there's about 1 billion cars in the world. There are people that say, well, we're shooting for 2 billion. We don't have the energy to run cars. It's not going to work. So we must go to mass transit and relocalize it. We got to get people to live where they work and get into the community again. They can't be living everywhere. And in Vermont, people like to live 10, 20, 30 miles from work. That's going to disappear. The 10-acre lot way out in the middle of nowhere on a dirt road is not going to be working anymore. It's going to get expensive to live like that. So we have to get closer to where we work. And we're going to switch to heating with electric heat pumps. We're going to electrify our heating system. And when we go to mass transit, we're going to have to electrify our trains. It's much more efficient to run an electric train than it is a diesel locomotive, about 3 times more efficient. And the idea that we're going to be flying around in airplanes is one of the worst consumers of energy and emitting carbon. It's really nice, but I tell my kids that are in their 20s, I said, if you're going to travel now. Don't wait 50 years. It's going to cost you 10 times as much for every one of those flights.
What does a ton of carbon actually mean? Is that from 100 cars, for example, or
A ton of carbon?
Yeah.
Well,
You say a ton of carbon, so I'm thinking, is that 100 cars produced in that, or
I'm trying to remember
a
what.
factory in the Midwest?
Well, it's every gallon of your average car burning, I believe, is 5.6 pounds or so.
So you're looking at 200 gallons of fuel to get a ton of carbon. Yeah. Something like it's really confusing when you measure something that's in the air as tons of something, because it seems like, well, it should be sort of solid.
Well, I mean, if we talk about it, we need to know what it means.
Yeah, it's all on the combustion of the carbon source. So whether it's gasoline or coal, they have a certain amount per pound or unit. Yeah.
See, we've come this long way, but we could do much better on the combustion of the cars. We made the car too complex to save, but we're not really saving with the complexity of the car, because cars 40 years ago got 40 miles to the gallon.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's all about
We had a
the-
Honda Civic hatchback that got 50 miles to the gallon in the 1980s.
Yeah.
But when you look at it, the efficiency of a car, when you convert a gallon of gasoline to actually moving down the road, you only get 5 to 10% of the, you're losing 90%. And so the internal combustion engine diesels have a peak efficiency around 30%. So you're going to end up wasting almost 3/4 if you burn any fuel in a combustion cycle. So that's why combustion doesn't work long term. The very first steam engines, they were lucky to be 1% efficient burning coal. And so they got those better and better. But efficiency matters. All these things matter.
Just for reference on flying, how inefficient it is from a past life, so I know these facts. To fly from New York to LA, if you weigh 300 pounds, you're going to burn 150 pounds of fuel. Okay? And if you go on a 787 or I think these large long-distance aircraft, the fuel weight equals or sometimes exceeds the weight from the airplane itself. So the flying tanks of fuel. And that's fact.
Yeah, and the trick with fuel consumption is the faster you go, the more fuel. And so an airplane is flying at 500 miles an hour. But if you go and take a ship and float across the ocean, that is orders of magnitude more efficient. About 100 times more efficient to ship a container of a ton of container freight than it is to fly it. It's 100 times difference. So that's why we have container ships, because you float it and you only go about 20 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour. You don't go about 500 miles an hour. Speed means consumption. And so we're going to end up in a future where things are going to move by water and trains. Water is the most efficient, then you go to trains, and then you go to trucks, and then you go to air. And the difference between some Cheerios from Amazon grocery, and they brought them in, UPS Blue, and they got flown in. I said, that's really a wasteful way to move some Cheerios. And I'm just going to get toward the end here, and I'm just going to give you a future look, because Vermont is in an ideal place. We're a small state. We have low population density, and we have resources. We have the wind and sun, hydro, and we can be the example for the rest of the United States and a large part of the world. So if we can't make renewables work here, I don't think anybody can. So we have to be the leader and show. So sometimes there's teachers at the university who say, well, we're going to go to China and tell them how to do it. I said, well, why aren't we doing it here? Stay here and show them by doing it, not by just telling them and not doing it here. We have to do these things. And luckily, Middlebury and Middlebury College, the colleges are finally getting it, that they got to do it themselves. Otherwise, they're basically hypocrites. They're telling others to do it, but we don't have to do it. That we got to do it and show. So here's the future picture of, this is just electric supply. And right now in Vermont, we have about 700 average megawatts of, well, it's around 800 now, because this is old data, 2007. Vermont Yankee was in there, but that's gone. So we are going to convert to a lot more electricity, maybe triple from those numbers, because we have to convert all these other sources, oil, natural gas, some coal we burn, into renewables and use that energy. Right now, I have a handout here if you want to take it, but a little less than 2 years ago, we in Vermont were at about 12% renewable energy, total energy, not just electricity, total energy, 12%. And our goal in the state of Vermont by 2050 is 90%. So how do we get there? So we came up with a plan to do 20% by 2020. Well, we've gone from 12 to maybe 13%. We're nowhere close to it. It's hard, but we got to start moving faster. And it's all, and in there, the same pie charts. We'll show you these things. But we must move to massive amounts of renewables. And I think it's the next slide. Here, we may see electric rates go up. All electric rates are going to go up because we need a lot more electricity. Oil prices are going to go up. All these things are going to go up. Renewables are key. We're going to go and try to get, well, here's something interesting. Right now, we import almost 90% of our energy in the state of Vermont. Over $3 billion a year gets shipped out of the state, mostly for oil. But we're buying electricity out of state and other things. And another example is, you've heard it from the food folks, almost 90% of our food is imported. So that's all bought from elsewhere. And we like to be proud of ourselves as Vermonters that we're independent. We're not independent. We're only 10% independent on everything. So we're like Disneyland in Orlando. Every day, in the back doors, all this stuff comes in to make this facade work. And that's what we got to change. We got to change that. So there's a bunch of things we can do. Energy literacy on the bottom. We have to be able to start thinking and understanding, and I talk about all energy in electrical units. The Europeans do this, but in the United States, we talk about energy in gallons, BTUs, kilowatts. We all get confused.
What is NWA?
I added the A for average.
Oh.
Because, so it's megawatts, megawatt hours,
Yeah.
and then, because megawatts is like a kilowatt, it's instantaneous. Megawatt hours is your energy over time. And average megawatts is what does it average? So when I talk about electricity in Vermont, it's 800 average megawatts. So 800 megawatts for every hour of the year. Then you multiply it and you get megawatt hours. And here's some numbers that some people get scared to death. You know, Annette Smith that we're taping this for, Annette will get scared to death of this. We're talking about 6,000 megawatts of solar capacity, 3,000 megawatts of wind to hit these goals. That's capacity. Now, the wind doesn't always blow all the time. The sun doesn't always shine in the middle of the night. Of course it doesn't. So we have to overbuild capacity to get those megawatt hours or the energy that we're expecting all the time. And it's a thing called capacity factor. So on solar, the capacity factor of solar, to get to average megawatts, you have to multiply 6,000 by 15% or 0.15. If you do that, you get 900 average megawatts. Remember the slide back, I'm saying we need about 2,100 megawatts of of average power to hit our goals. So there's 900. Capacity factor on wind is around 30%. So there's another 900. So we're at 1,800. We're getting close. So those are rough numbers of how to get to this goal. Just so you know, there's about 50 megawatts of solar installed in the state of Vermont, with maybe another 50 over the next 2 years. We got a long ways to go.
I'm sorry, so why would someone be scared of that?
It means we're going to have a lot more solar.
And what are the reasons to be concerned or afraid of having solar?
Well, there's controversy in this area, in the state, that they don't want to look at.
Not my bad.
So are there any concerns about wetlands or migration corridors that you think might be critical?
Yeah, there's a lot of environmental things we have to look at. Wetlands, habitat fragmentation, all these things, or prime ag land. But it's interesting because they say, oh, you can't build solar here because it's prime ag. Well, why do you allow houses to be built on? Well, I don't know.
You made such a great point about the food that we
Right.
only have that percentage of our food here, so it would seem that agricultural lands are really important, that perhaps maybe could solar go on rooftops?
Oh yeah, if you take every rooftop available in the state of Vermont, you do all available ones that are faced right, it only turns out to be about 25% of the rooftops will work. So you take all those and just make sure they all get done, you're still only about 1% to 2% of our total energy needs if you do all that. So you have to go on the ground for solar. So when you do that, we're going to have issues with agricultural land, but when you look around Vermont, we have so much of our ag land already growing over. With a 10-acre Act 250 law, people ended up building houses on 10-acre lots. And the house eats up this much, there you have 5 acres of farm field now growing over. Once it grows over into trees, it's really hard to reclaim that and make it ag land again. So that's important to look at all the ag land we do have, but we aren't using it. We have to grow a lot more food in Vermont.
Thank you, David. To that point, talk to me about how the solar panels themselves have gotten better over time, where you can create so much more electricity with the same amount of square feet or square inches. So it is, maybe my daydream, that the 6,000 megawatts is, the computer I first worked on in the 70s, 60s, took the size of this room, and now I'm carrying it on my hip,
Oh yeah.
I'm hoping or feeling that the space required to create that will become less and less.
I'm going to disappoint you because it is not like computers as far as. No, what we have is theoretical limits in a lab of what a solar cell can produce for a certain amount of area. Right now, it's close to 40% efficiency of getting sunlight converted. Well, 40%. You're never going to get 100, and they think maybe someday we might be able to get 50 or 60. We don't know. But right now, our best solar panels are 23%. The best you could probably ever do in our lifetime is double the efficiency of solar. So that means half the area. It is not like you're going to double the efficiency every year, like computer technology.
There's no Moore's law.
What's that?
There's no Moore's law or whatever it was.
Right.
You're up against thermodynamics, and that's a law which nobody is ever going to revoke.
Right. Yeah, there's some physical limits, and so that's always the dream, but it's not going to happen. We're in solar panels, wind turbines are evolving and getting slightly better every year. There's no revolution. There's no doubling every 2.5 years of efficiency. That won't happen. It happened with computers for a reason, because of transistor, but we won't see that.
So what about the batteries?
Batteries?
Just store solar? Is that improving?
Batteries are improving, but here's another myth that we have to I have to attack right on the head. We do not need storage to make solar and wind and renewables work. Until we get upwards to 70, 80% integrating wind, solar, hydro, all these other sources into the grid, we need no storage. So you heard about this Tesla thing. Elon Musk said, oh, isn't this battery cool? It's a dead end. We don't need it. And all it does is cost money and energy and materials to simply shift some electricity from the daytime to the nighttime or nighttime to daytime, whenever. When you're moving electricity in a battery, you lose over 20% of its energy by just one charge-discharge cycle. So why would you do things that lose energy? You don't do that. So what we have to do is build this thing called the smart grid. You hear the words, but it's not been done yet. And that is, we have to integrate wind and solar into the grid so that the grid works efficiently. When you look at those power wires and the power stations, we basically built a grid system that Addison and Westinghouse designed based on a central coal plant with all these wires going down one-way streets to your home. Think how efficient one-way streets are. They're not. We must now have a grid system that has two-way streets. Right now it's not two-way. We're now starting with solar and wind to start the energy going in many directions. And the internet's based on this web that everything flows everywhere. And that's what we have to do with the grid system.
Well, it's antiquated, isn't it?
It's a 100-year-old system.
Yeah. Basically, I talk to people that from North Carolina to work on the grid there, it's antiquated, and we're never going to be able to have better electricity until we renew the grid.
Other countries in the world nationalize their grid, and it's not. Right now, our grid in the United States is privately owned, basically, by the utility companies and groups. And I think we have to nationalize the grid just like we've nationalized the highway system. The only reason we have interstate highways that work is because it got nationalized. Somebody had to build them, somebody had to subsidize them.
But that also contributed to all the problems you talked about.
Oh, I know. It's just, I want less of the highways and more of things that we have to do, like a grid system that works.
We subsidized the trucking industry by building the interstate highway system.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Put the railroads out of business for free.
In the first paragraph of your slide, you mentioned 3,000 megawatts of wind. If I assume that those would be turbine at 1.5 megawatt, probably would you
Yeah, 1.5 to 2.5 megawatt machines.
I calculated, in Maine we had a similar project of 2,800 megawatts of gold. We calculated this represent stretching turbines, about 1,800 turbines if they're 1.5 megawatt, over 360 miles of mountain. So I am a little surprised that you appear somewhat surprised yourself that people would oppose this. I brought to you a chart that you probably are aware of, which is the carbon dioxide emission 2012 in million metric tons in every state in this country. Vermont is number 50 out of 51 states, producing 5.1 million metric tons. So I am also surprised that a state that produced such a minimal amount of million metric ton in comparison, say, to Texas, producing 656 million ton, and I would go on 49 more times because this is number 50. I'm surprised that you are surprised, that we are surprised that those goals are rather illogical in a state where the scenic aspect is the number one sellout factor for the state very much. I come from Maine. I've lived there for 30 years, and I've been active in this renewable energy perception and understanding for 6 years. So I am surprised that you pretty much say the same thing as Governor Baldacci said, that we need to be a leader when we are a state with such a low production of carbon dioxide emission. And I want the audience to really understand, I have not assessed what 6,000 megawatt of solar would created them, but I live in Addison County, so I can have an idea. But I do know what 3,000 megawatt of wind would produce. And I want this audience to understand that the entire Green Mountain would be full of turbines.
No, it's not going to be on the Green Mountains. Modern wind turbines, the ones I put up on Georgia Mountain, and what you will be seeing is turbines with larger rotors, taller towers, and they're called low wind speed turbines. They will go on the lower ridges. And Georgia Mountain is a very small mountain. It's only 1,400 feet. It's not on the top of the Green Mountains. And this number here, yeah, 3,000 megawatts. You can put about 15 megawatts per mile, so that's 200 miles of ridges. In Vermont, we have 600 plus miles of ridgeline. So we don't have to do all the ridges. The other thing that's misleading about the carbon dioxide that Vermonters emit is we import tremendous amounts of embedded carbon dioxide in our products because we import things. We import almost everything into the state. So that's embedded in. And to say, oh, and we're also low in carbon dioxide because we only have 600 and some thousand people.
Right.
Yeah, so we
We
have
also
low.
killed Vermont Yankee
low
now, so
people.
actually we're actually much higher than we were in 2012 now. So
That's
decommission.
Yeah, a lot of Vermont Yankees power went out of state. Anyways.
I don't want to hijack your presentation, but I do want to point out that just because there's some geographic barriers, and we are in Vermont, doesn't mean that the whole world isn't in need of renewable energy. So if, as you said, if Vermont can lead the way, we aren't just trying to do our, mitigate our own impact, but there are other places on the planet that can't do what we can do, so we need to do more. It's not just trying to deal with what we're producing, but everybody has to step up, and those states and those places where there can be more renewable energy should step up.
Which actually is
And those
not
places
Vermont.
where that can happen, where it can happen, then.
Oh, yeah,
we
we all have to use and produce the renewables that we have. Certain places don't have as much sun, certain places don't have as much wind, so we all have to do it. Some places don't have any hydro, so you do what you can.
Aside from the aesthetics, which, I like looking at a turbine knowing what it's doing, but my understanding is that there's a huge amount of environmental impact in the installation of those turbines. There's a lot of destruction of, with the roads running into build these things and the area around the turbines. And what about that?
Yeah, there's impact. Georgia Mountain, to do 10% of Burlington's electricity, we impacted something like 18 acres of land. And so it's a balancing act. You're going to have impacts, yes. So the road area, the industry's getting better on making sure we have less and less impacts as far as how you put these turbines up. Since the turbines are big now, they're 2.5 megawatts. The first turbines in California in 1981 were, let me see, they were 35 times smaller. So you needed 35 individual turbines to do one of these big ones. So the impacts are much higher. So over time, we've gotten better and better reducing impacts. We're always going to have an impact. Anything we do in energy, we have impacts. Whether it's solar, wind, coal, nuclear, they all have impacts.
What is a wind turbine like, one of the ones on Way on Georgia Mountain?
What do they weigh?
Well,
They're heavy. They're heavy.
Well, are they like 20 tons, 100 tons?
Well, let me
or-
just give you a few numbers.
The reason why I'm asking this, that's a big complaint of Vermonters, is you have to build these huge roads to get a 300-foot object up the road.
Well, the towers were 13 feet in diameter, and each tower section weighed about 70 to 90,000 pounds.
Yeah,
So these are dirt roads, and they went over the road, and they're just like a big truck. So yeah, they weigh a lot because you have to put a fair amount of steel to hold 2.5 megawatts of power plant. It's huge. It is big.
In concrete.
And there's concrete. Luckily, on Georgia Mountain, most of the anchoring, there's a concrete pad, but the anchoring is 50 feet into solid rock. So you use rock anchors to hold the whole thing down. There's 27 3-inch diameter rods that go into the rock that holds those turbines from falling over. So you try to minimize your concrete.
On the aesthetic point of view, one wonders what happens when the first person in Holland built one of his windmills. And what do people do now? They go to Holland to see the windmills. So the aesthetics, I live next to a hydro unit and a substation. Don't talk to me about spoiling the aesthetics of Vermont. We have ruined the aesthetics of Vermont just with our distribution lines down every street. Go to a town in Europe and they're all underground.
Yeah, we have over 500,000 power poles listed. Close to 1 million. It's somewhere in between there.
One thing you had mentioned at one point was just this idea of moving away from a place where people are working far away from their homes. And of course, you know, living rurally in Vermont is, you know, in some ways hard to separate from kind of being in Vermont. I mean, it's kind of core in a lot of ways. And one thing that I just think is an interesting tie-in is that one barrier that I see to having people be able to work more from home, and it doesn't apply to all, you know, all sectors of the economy, but for a lot of people working from home is going to be more and more realistic. But of course, the access to internet, the access to cell coverage and broadband is a problem. And some of the limits on, and I'm no huge fan of how cell towers look, but there's such strict permitting in Vermont for the height of cell towers that I even remember a few years ago people were looking at co-locating cell phone towers on wind turbines because it was so much easier to permit a wind turbine than a cell phone tower. And, you know, that sort of impediment, which is, I think, basically an aesthetic impediment of not wanting to see tall cell phone towers, actually has a real material effect on people's ability to work from home. And the ability to work from home can have a big effect on the ability to use less energy on a daily basis for each person. So, I mean, it's kind of a side issue, but there are a number of places where a total insistence on not seeing the utilities in our lives costs us a lot. And when we consider that roads correspond with our utility corridors, and so much of our view time, like looking at beautiful Vermont, is on the roads, there's a real like built-in conflict there that we have to kind of.
Come down Route 7 and see all the double poles that they haven't taken out for 10 years.
The net metering
Yeah.
has helped a lot in several ways. One is that when you put the energy into the electrical wire, it doesn't lose very much electricity by the time it hits the next house.
Yeah, your neighbor. Yeah.
If you're carrying that electricity, you know, across the state of Vermont, down from the south of, and across, you're losing, I think, 80% of the electricity. I'm not sure about that, but I
You
think.
can lose 10 or 20% by long distance transmission.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's not going to be 80, but that's why the proposal to put a power line under Lake Champlain to go to southern New England is a DC line. DC is more efficient transmitting long distances. So that is a major power line. But the reason they want to do that is southern New England has a much bigger problem energy-wise than we do. We're a small state. We can take care of ourselves. Massachusetts, Connecticut cannot. They will never generate renewables to power their states. They have too many people and not enough land area to do it. It's not going to work. So they need that power from Canada. So when that line goes in, a number of us in the renewable energy business say, make sure that line goes to Chester, and there's a little meter there, there's a toll charge, and it just goes clink, 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 clink. So every time these guys are buying power, we get some of that toll charge. We can do good
My
things.
thing is, we ought to be getting the power. We are using 30% right now from Hydro-Quebec. We should up it to 60 until we get, you know.
Well, I have a differing view. I hear where you're going, and because we rely on Canadian hydropower. But here's the problem. Southern New England needs every bit of that line. Probably, they need 5 times of what that line can carry. They need 5,000 to 10,000 megawatts in Southern New England, because they're burning natural gas for everything, electricity. So we are never going to outbid Southern New England for Canadian power. And the Canadians only have on the order of 2,000 to 3,000 megawatts to sell, total. So we're never going to outbid them. So why not take the toll charge and do it ourselves?
Maybe we should get the power.
But then that slows down what we need to do here.
Well, not really,
No,
because
it does. It does.
Why,
because-
why destroy our environment in the process of giving other people power? I don't understand that.
Destroy what environment?
Our environment.
With the power line?
Your wind towers up there have
It
affected a lot of
doesn't, no,
people.
no, it's saving us.
It has affected a lot of people. They're sick up there.
Sick where?
Have you
Sick up
visited
in.
Lowell?
Huh?
Have you visited Lowell?
Oh, yeah, I own land in Lowell.
Oh, okay, well, I have visited it also, and I think that's what this gentleman is talking about.
Mhm. People do not get sick by looking at wind turbines. I'm sorry, wind turbine syndrome.
But you get it by hearing it. And
No,
I,
you don't.
listen, I took the state of Vermont. I took
I
the
have a
state
wind
of
turbine in my
Vermont
backyard.
medical officer to Sheffield,
Mhm.
and we stayed overnight,
I know, it's,
you know.
So I'd like to get back-
Because he can't say anything because he's afraid he's gonna lose
wind
his
turbine
job.
syndrome has never been documented in the world to cause people to get sick. Sorry.
I thought Caleb brought up a great point, which is that, cell phone towers fall under local zoning or ordinances, but wind turbines don't. And I'd just be curious to hear your kind of thoughts on the role of local zoning or even local say in
Local
citing.
control versus state, yes. Okay.
Just you're kind of, I'm sure
Because
some of you deal with a lot in
wind and
course of
solar
projects.
are energy sources that are all under the Public Service Board preview. And so all the permitting is done at the Public Service Board statewide. And there's a reason for that. On all energy, the Public Service Board handles this instead of locals because it's in the common good of the state of Vermont. It's in the common good of everyone. And so when you go to local control, it's really easy to say any town can veto with one vote of no. Then the town has to become responsible for saying no. And when they say no to everything, why should they benefit when they put all their external problems onto other people? When you burn oil in your house, you are now externalizing all these problems to other people. When you import electricity or something, or burn coal, you are now putting in Appalachia and removing mountains. I don't think that's right. So when you have a group like the Public Service Board, they are looking out for the common good of Vermont.
I think that is a very strong logical argument, but to take the idea that southern New England needs a lot of energy and that we should kind of subsidize.
We're not subsidizing, we're taking a toll for that.
You make
You know,
money.
you bury this, the cable's this big.
But they have a need,
Oh, yeah.
and we're creating the energy that they need just to.
Yes. Our electric system in New England, called Addison, New England, is 55% natural gas-fired electricity. So when we buy external electricity into the state, when we need it, it's fossil fuel generated natural gas, and it's bad for the environment. It's carbon, it pollutes, it does all these things. So we have a responsibility too.
But see, that's a fallacy. One of the problems that we're having is Virginia, North Carolina, all of those states are using worse fuel than natural gas. And something needs to be done about it.
Yeah, you're burning.
And we don't have a good energy plan, so all of this is bullshit, basically, because there is no good, the state of Vermont doesn't have a good energy plan.
Well, it has an excellent
I really
energy
get
goal.
annoyed when we don't use the hydropower that we could be using, because there has to be an interim time, you see, and we don't have that interim time, so that every Vermonter could be on board with some alternative energy.
David, before you respond to that one, I was just thinking, we probably have time for a couple more questions, and if there's anyone who hasn't kind of had one yet, maybe we just give folks a chance who haven't had a question. Is there anyone in that category?
I'd like to finish on noise.
No, we're
Well,
going to ask.
just because
Okay.
just so we can hear from a couple people we haven't heard from yet. Did you have a question?
Okay. There were 2 points brought up, Mr. Blittersdorf, that I've been harping on for quite a while that you did bring up. One is that we should all show by example, and the other is that jet airplanes are a tremendous waste of energy. And I have noticed over the years, and I've written about this too, that our biggest proponents of saving the world, which is what we should do, of course, but our biggest proponents crave getting on jet airplanes for nothing but leisurely travel. Now, shouldn't our best proponents, Governor Shumlin's one of them, and I've harped on him in the newspapers, and Mary Powell, you maybe? I don't know.
I don't travel
but
for a reason.
why are we putting up with these people talking about cutting back and then they're right on these airplanes?
Let me show you a local mistake. This Burlington Airport expansion for airplanes and cars, they built a $40-some million parking garage. They now want an exit off of 89 so we can get cars off of 89 quicker to those parking garages. $90 million. Who's going to pay for that?
Wow.
We're all going to pay for it. But this is the real future.
Right.
That biking, walking, buses.
Can I just ask one question?
Yeah.
What does it cost environmentally and in carbon use to make a wind turbine and to make a solar panel? You have a tremendous amount of aluminum. Aluminum is the most expensive metal in the world.
Yeah, let me answer that. That was back in the beginning when I talked about energy return on energy invested. That's your profitability of every energy source. Modern solar installations return about 10 times more energy than it takes to build them life cycle. In other words, building the panel, installing them, running them, and then taking them out. 10 times more energy.
But taking the earth out of the ground to make the aluminum?
Everything.
And you calculate that?
There's been studies done. Look up energy return on energy invested. It's a science that has been there for a while. Now there's ranges. It's not precise. Maybe it's 8 to 1, maybe it's 12 to 1. But basically that's the estimate. Modern wind turbines, 2.5 megawatt turbines like I put up on Georgia Mountain, return anywhere from 25 to 50 times more energy than it takes to build them, install them, run them, and decommission.
How much ground do you move in order to build one?
I don't know. It depends on the site.
No, I mean how much ground do you have to move in order to get the iron and to get the components?
All the diesel, all the stuff required to mine iron ore to do all these things. Now, if you want to use that analogy, what's the energy return on an SUV? When you mine the ore to make the steel, to make the SUV and drive it down the road, what's the energy return? It's hugely negative. It's a consumer of energy. It doesn't produce a darn thing. But this is what we do in our world. We drive around in these things and say, oh, isn't this okay? And you're arguing that a wind turbine isn't productive enough. It is. It's huge. Ethanol is 1 to 1, remember. Tar sands is about 3 to 1. We shouldn't be doing tar sands. We should be doing a hell of a lot more solar and a lot more wind. You look at all the energy sources, and they all have this energy return on energy investment calculation. And you must do the ones that have the highest amount.
I'd like to ask
You've
you.
already talked.
I want to speak a couple of things. When you said, yes, maybe you have to look at the fracking and the impact and the amount of methane every time they open the well for 3 months. That's
I don't agree with that.
just want to say that. And when you're speaking about the Public Service Board, I understand the idea of having the board say rather than a local town, and I think aesthetics often can be addressed with screening, more natural screening, a crab apple as well as a prison roll of Route 7 arborvitae single line. But I have huge concerns about the natural gas process with the Public Service Board, and that is the weak point of that system.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think what you're seeing is the idea that we've lived with fossil fuels for so long, and it's embedded in the system. Now, I'm saying in the biggest picture, it's the right place to do it. It's just that we have to change their outlook on fossil fuels. I'm not a supporter of natural gas in the state of Vermont, because it's a fossil fuel, and it's long-term bad.
This will be the last question, okay, because we do have to move on.
Just because we talked about noise.
Let him go. Ask a question.
In 2010, I attended Bernie Sanders' Green Jobs Conference at the State House. It was a panel discussion, and you were there. And I remember Bernie asked the question, what about conservation and efficiency? Aren't we missing the low-hanging fruit? And your response to that was it really blew me away. You said, we have our eye on the wrong target with renewables. Without massive efforts, and you alluded to it a little bit here, but you said without massive efforts at conservation and efficiency, we will never close the fossil fuel gap. So I guess my point is, we're spending hundreds of millions of tax dollars to subsidize all of these wind projects, but we're not spending anywhere near that amount of money on conservation and efficiency. And it's my understanding that conservation and efficiency returns one of the best returns on investment, much better than the investment in solar or wind, which require massive subsidies. But anybody here could spend $1 on conservation and efficiency and earn that money back within a short period of time. So I guess my question is, if you understand our problem as well as you seem to understand it, why are you putting up wind turbines? Why aren't you proselytizing for conservation and efficiency? And let me just follow it up with another question.
Let me answer.
But it's important. They're both tied together. The grid. It's important for the grid to have reliability. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
So the ISO New England has a great website, and one of their documents, which is called sort of the grid for dummies, it's Grid 101, talks about the integration of renewables. And it says that the problem with integrating renewables is their intermittency and the fact that you can't dispatch them. You have to take them when they come. And the grid's solution to that is fast-acting gas turbines. So you made a good point about how we shouldn't be shifting our problems onto other people. Well, shouldn't wind developers keep that problem amongst themselves as well and put in gas turbines that account for the 75% or 70% of the time that the turbine's not operating, so you're not shifting the burden of fossil fuel generation or some other type of generation onto people who keep reducing their profit because wind is cutting into it, because wind is favorited by the grid because of its zero fuel cost. So that would be, I think, a way for you to provide dispatchable energy. When the wind isn't blowing, you would be running your gas turbine, but that's going to require more gas pipelines. So in order to do that, you would have to be in favor of gas pipelines as well.
Well, okay.
So those are my two questions.
Yeah, okay. Let me answer your second question. It's really quite simple. We have ISO New England and a system of fossil generation that's based on history. These guys wrote that report because they do not understand the future. And you're exactly right. Fast cycling natural gas turbines is for backup for renewables. We shouldn't have to pay for that. What happens instead is New England is 55% natural gas fired, base load. Those suckers run all the time. They bid in the market, they run. My wind farm was curtailed one night so that natural gas plants could run. GMP's hydro facilities, their wind facility, my wind facility, all were asked to shut down. We were forced to shut down because they wanted to run natural gas.
They didn't want to run natural gas.
Yes, they did, because the system, the system
was
is
natural
set
gas
up.
bidding?
Well, they bid in, and they had to run, because they took me offline because they didn't have a penalty to pay me. So, it was an economic thing to run gas. So the system is biased to fossil fuels. That's all I'm saying. You're exactly right. We should only be using natural gas to back up the intermittency of renewable solar and everything else. So therefore, you use a lot less natural gas.
Well, the grid's...
We need to draw this to a close because we have to be out of here at 8:30, and we do have some other things to do. I really want to thank you for the talk, and I thank you all for in because there are so many questions, let us know, okay? I would like to announce, because I know some of you are going to leave, we're going to have another informational meeting on June 22nd, same time, 7 o'clock. We're going to have rural Vermont coming in to talk about what they do for agriculture. And I would invite you all to come and attend that. And again, thank you very much.